Two bodies were found in a dark bedroom, a girl and her friend, covered in blood, with dozens of stab wounds. The room smelled of metal and terror. The cousin, obsessed with forbidden passion, couldn't come to terms with their intimacy. A few intimate text messages became the final spark of his madness. The story began long before that fateful night. Born into a poor family in the suburbs of a small American town, Daniel Brooks grew up a withdrawn and short-tempered teenager. During his school years, he was characterized by his mistrust of others and his abrupt nature. His parents noted his dependence on control. Daniel had a hard time handling situations where someone didn't submit to his will. As a teenager, he developed a particularly close relationship with his cousin, Laura Matthews. They were the same age, attended the same classes, and often spent time together. At first, it seemed like a simple friendship, but gradually the boundaries shifted. Daniel perceived Laura not only as a relative, but also as an object of attraction. His attention intensified, and he tried to be there for her in every situation, walking her home, offering help, and controlling her social circle. Laura treated him with reserve. She saw him as family and didn't take his attention seriously. However, by the end of high school, her personal preferences had become more defined. Laura increasingly spent time with her friends, particularly Sarah Hill, a girl 2 years older. Soon, Laura confessed to her family that she had romantic feelings for the girls. This wasn't a shock to her family, but it did spark discussion. Daniel took a different approach. His attitude was a mixture of jealousy and incomprehension. He didn't accept her sexuality and considered her delusional. At first, he tried to joke about it, but gradually his behavior took on an aggressive tone. Every time Laura mentioned dating Sarah, he became irritated. His caustic comments would slip into conversations between relatives. By the time Laura and Sarah began dating openly, tensions had reached a fever pitch. Daniel began texting Laura, alternately begging her to pay attention to him and threatening Sarah. These emotional swings became increasingly pronounced. In one message, he wrote, "You don't realize you're ruining your life. I can show you how it should be." Laura tried to distance herself and avoid direct conflict, but the situation was spiraling out of control. While dating Sarah, she tried to keep the relationship under wraps in front of her family, but rumors quickly spread. Daniel began showing up more and more often, stalking them after school, and once even causing a scene outside a cafe where the two were holding hands. Episodes of obsessive behavior became regular. Laura's parents tried to talk to Daniel, but he refused to acknowledge the problem. The Brooks family, on the other hand, thought he was too worried about his cousin. No one suspected that this would escalate into tragedy. The first warning signs appeared in his diaries. Investigators would later discover entries in which he described Laura as his property and expressed disdain for her relationship. In them, he noted that her relationship with the girl was a humiliation that had to be stopped. These entries became crucial evidence, confirming the gradual development of a dangerous obsession. Despite Laura and Sarah's attempts to maintain a calm relationship, conflicts with Daniel intensified. The girls increasingly discussed limiting contact with him. Sarah suggested filing a police complaint, but Laura hesitated. She didn't want to air the family disputes. This delay proved fatal. Thus began a chain of events that soon escalated into disaster. Daniel's obsession, fueled by jealousy and resentment of his cousin's choice, became increasingly dangerous and obvious to everyone around him. Laura and Sarah's relationship quickly evolved from friendship into a strong union. The girls began spending almost all their free time together, studying, meeting friends, and going on trips out of town together. For the first time, Laura felt truly happy and didn't hide it. Sarah supported her in everything and was willing to openly defend their relationship. This became unbearable for Daniel. He took every encounter as a personal insult. At first, he tried to influence Laura through conversation. In rare moments of candor, he told her that he was confusing friendship with something else and having a temporary crush. Laura responded bluntly. She had made her choice. These conversations invariably ended in arguments. Gradually, Daniel's behavior escalated. He began calling Laura at night, leaving accusatory and threatening messages on her answering machine. His words included phrases like, "No one has the right to take her," and that he won't allow their connection to be destroyed. Soon, his attention shifted to Sarah. She began receiving anonymous calls. The voice on the line was distorted, but Sarah guessed it was Daniel. Sometimes the threats turned into action. Laura told a friend that Daniel lay in wait for her near the university, monitoring her movements. Several times, he came to Sarah's house, loudly knocked on the door, and demanded to talk. Neighbors called the police, but he hid before the patrol arrived. Around this time, the girls began seriously considering a restraining order. The family also saw changes. Laura's mother tried to intervene, calling her sister Daniel's mother and asking her to influence her son. However, her sister didn't believe the problem was serious. She believed that teenage jealousy would subside on its own. Sarah's parents took a different approach. They warned their daughter of the dangers and advised her to document all instances of threats. In the spring, the situation reached a new level. Laura and Sarah decided to move into a rented apartment to escape the constant pressure. The move provoked a violent reaction from Daniel. He perceived it as the ultimate betrayal. In diaries later found by the police, he wrote, "They want to hide from me, but I still know where they are. If they're not with me, then they're not with anyone." During this period, he showed the first clear signs of planning. A neighbor noticed Daniel buying knives and punching equipment. When asked why, he explained that he was into self-defense. He began locking himself in his room more often, listening to music with headphones and taking notes. His behavior at work was also alarming. Colleagues noted his isolation and outbursts of aggression. Meanwhile, Laura and Sarah's relationship continued to develop. They hosted dinners together and invited friends over. The girls tried not to give in to their fear and maintain their usual rhythm of life. But Daniel was increasingly appearing nearby. They were seen in the supermarket parking lot and at the entrance to their apartment building. His intense surveillance and silent stares frightened them both. The conflict peaked in July. One evening, when Laura and Sarah were returning home, Daniel was waiting for them at the apartment door. He started a fight, yelling at Sarah, accusing her of breaking up the family. The neighbors called the police, and this time he was arrested. At the station, he was given a warning and ordered to stay away from the girls. It seemed like this might stop him, but instead of easing the tension, the incident strengthened his resolve. Soon, he began texting again. Now, they were more somber. "Do you think the police will save you?" "No one will." The friends sensed growing danger. Sarah insisted on filing a formal report of stalking, but Laura hesitated. She didn't want to completely ruin the family relationship, hoping her cousin would come to his senses. These doubts proved fatal. Despite the apparent calm, Daniel became increasingly preoccupied with the idea of reprisal. His behavior indicated that the conflict had crossed a line beyond which only a tragic outcome remained. Summer was gradually drawing to a close, and on the surface, life seemed calm for Laura and Sarah. They were furnishing their small apartment, inviting guests, and making plans for the future. Laura was planning to continue her studies, and Sarah had found a part-time job at a nearby cafe. But behind this apparent calm lurked a constant anxiety. The girls knew Daniel hadn't left them alone. After his arrest in July, he became more cautious. Direct confrontations gave way to surveillance and indirect threats. Sarah spotted his car several times near the cafe where she worked. Laura said she saw him at university, although he didn't have classes there. Occasionally, the girls received strange messages on social media hinting at their personal lives. The author didn't sign his name, but the style pointed to Daniel. The police limited themselves to formal investigations. In the absence of direct evidence of persecution, the case remained stagnant. This gave Daniel a sense of impunity. In diaries discovered later, he wrote, "They laugh at me and think they've hidden. But I see everything. Time flies, and soon everything will end as it should." Witnesses reported that during this period, his appearance changed dramatically. He lost weight, became unkempt, and often wore the same clothes. Neighbors noticed the light on in his room at night, and muffled thumps and loud music coming from inside. One day, one of the neighbors peered through the window and saw Daniel stabbing a bag hanging from the ceiling with a knife. Sarah tried to convince Laura to file a protective order, but Laura still hoped the situation wouldn't reach a breaking point. She limited her contact with her cousin, ignoring his calls and texts. However, this silence became a new source of irritation for him. August brought new signs of impending disaster. Daniel bought a hunting knife and registered the purchase at a sporting goods store. The clerk later told investigators that the young man appeared agitated but said he was going hiking. A few days later, he purchased black gloves and a balaclava. Meanwhile, Laura and Sarah felt increasingly besieged. They noticed footsteps on the stairs and doorbells ringing, only to find no one there. Sarah tried not to let Laura go alone, especially in the evenings. She understood the threat was real, but she couldn't fully control the situation. In early September, Laura finally decided to file a police report of stalking. However, the evidence was insufficient. The police report merely recorded the complaint, but no serious action was taken. The girls tried to console themselves with the thought that Daniel would become exhausted if he didn't get a response. But his resolve only grew stronger. In the middle of the month, he tried to talk to Laura for the last time. He waited for her near the university and tried to convince her to return to him, claiming her relationship with Sarah was not real. Laura responded firmly and abruptly, then left without looking back. This conversation, judging by his journal entries, was a turning point. The phrase, "since they've made their choice, I'll make mine," appeared in his diary. The final weeks before the tragedy were filled with preparations. Daniel stopped showing up for work, telling his superiors he was going on vacation. In reality, he spent his time alone, planning the upcoming attack. A handwritten diagram of Laura and Sarah's apartment was later found in his apartment. He'd left notes in the margins. "Door doesn't lock. Window weak. Best time is night." Laura and Sarah's behavior also changed. They lived in constant tension, discussing the possibility of moving to another city. But there wasn't enough time to organize it. Laura often shared her fears with her friends, saying she was afraid of running into her cousin on the street. Sarah, on the other hand, tried to remain firm and encouraged her, assuring her that together they could handle it. Neighbors recalled seeing a young man in dark clothing in the building's entryway several times shortly before the tragedy. He didn't speak to anyone and quickly left if he noticed anyone paying attention. Thus, by the time of that fateful night, all the signs of impending disaster were evident. Daniel was fully immersed in his plans and preparing for the decisive step. Laura and Sarah recognized the threat, but failed to take decisive action that could have saved their lives. The events unfolded in early September, on the night between Friday and Saturday. According to neighbors, the evening began peacefully. Laura and Sarah returned home around 10 o'clock, bought groceries, and went to a cafe. There were no signs of tragedy awaiting them. The girls watched a movie, discussed their weekend plans, and texted friends. Daniel spent the day in complete solitude. Investigators, examining notes found later, discovered he had planned the date and time in advance. He had written in his notebook, "Today it all ends." Around midnight, he drove his car toward the area where Laura and Sarah's apartment was located. Neighbors recalled seeing his car parked in the shade nearby. He entered the building around 1:30 a.m. CCTV cameras captured him wearing dark clothing, a hoodie, and a backpack. The footage shows him standing by the door for several minutes, listening, then taking out a tool and picking the lock. The girls were in the living room at the time. Sarah was the first to hear the noise and went to investigate. When she opened the hallway door, Daniel lunged at her with a knife in his hand. He struck her in the shoulder, and she screamed and tried to close the door, but he forced his way in. A brief but fierce struggle ensued. Laura ran out of the room, trying to stop him. She screamed, calling for help, but the odds were stacked against her. Daniel stabbed Sarah several times, then turned to Laura. The girl's resistance only fueled his rage. Neighbors later reported hearing screams and sounds of a struggle, but didn't immediately realize what was happening. The attack lasted several minutes. According to the autopsy, Sarah suffered more than 15 stab wounds, Laura over 20. Both died almost instantly. Blood covered the living room floor, and evidence of a struggle stretched down the hallway. After the murder, Daniel didn't flee immediately. He went through the rooms, throwing several things on the floor, as if searching for confirmation of his suspicions. He would later write in his diary, "I did what I had to. Now they are together forever, but without her." Neighbors who heard his final, desperate scream called the police. A patrol arrived 10 minutes later, but the suspect had already left the apartment. Bloodstains were found on the stairs leading to the exit. Security cameras captured him running outside and getting into a car. The scene investigators discovered was horrific. 2 bodies lay in the living room, with a bloody knife and gloves lying nearby. The apartment looked as if a hurricane had raged inside. Broken furniture, shattered dishes, and blood stains on the walls. Forensic experts later noted that the level of violence indicated the perpetrator had been in a state of extreme emotional agitation. That same night, police began searching for Daniel. His car was soon spotted on the highway outside the city. A chase ensued, but he managed to escape. Investigators suspected the killer had planned a route and hiding place in advance. Thus, a tragic story that had been brewing for a long time reached its climax. 2 young women, whose relationship had sparked the obsession, were murdered with particular brutality. The perpetrator was released, further shocking the public. After the bodies were discovered in Laura and Sarah's apartment, police launched a large-scale operation to arrest Daniel Brooks. His name immediately became a prime suspect. Relatives reported long-standing conflicts, threats, and instances of stalking. Within the first few hours, investigators had direct evidence. Fingerprints on a weapon, shoe prints, and video footage from security cameras in the building's entrance. The search was complicated by the fact that Daniel had already fled. His car was found abandoned several kilometers outside the city. Bloodstains and personal belongings were found inside. Investigators suspected he had attempted to escape to a forested area and hide there. For 2 days, raids were conducted in the area, combing fields and checking abandoned houses. Canine units and drones were deployed. On the 3rd day, he was detained. A local farmer spotted a stranger walking along a country road. The young man was empty, his clothes were tattered, and he had cuts on his arms. When the patrol approached, he offered no resistance. The report states that the arrest was calm. Daniel appeared exhausted and unresponsive. During interrogation, he initially denied his guilt, claiming he remembered nothing. Later, under pressure from the evidence, he confessed. He described entering the apartment and striking the men. Investigators noted his detachment. He spoke of the crime dryly, without emotion, as if he were talking about a stranger. A forensic psychiatric examination found him sane and aware of the consequences of his actions. The experts noted a personality disorder with elements of obsessive jealousy, but found no ground for declaring him insane. Preparations for the trial lasted several months. Dozens of witnesses testified in court: neighbors, relatives, and friends of the girls. The prosecutor presented evidence of years of stalking, threats, and murder planning. Particular attention was paid to Daniel's diaries, where he detailed his thoughts on ownership and revenge. The defense attempted to mitigate the defendant's guilt by citing his mental state and difficult childhood. However, witness testimony and the brutality of the crime negated these arguments. The courtroom was packed. Journalists attended every hearing, covering the case as an example of the tragic consequences of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Laura and Sarah's parents testified in court, describing their daughter's final months and their fear of the defendant. The verdict came at the end of the trial. The court found Daniel Brooks guilty of aggravated double murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The judge specifically noted the defendant's high level of danger to society. The case sparked widespread public outcry. The local press discussed the need for tougher measures against stalking and threats within relationships. The police were criticized for not taking sufficient action when the women were trying to draw attention to the danger. For the victims' relatives, the verdict was the only possible outcome. They said justice had been restored only formally, as it was impossible to bring the dead back. Thus ended the trial, bringing an end to a high-profile criminal case, but leaving many questions about how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The story of obsession ended in bloody fashion. 2 young girls died at the hands of a man unable to come to terms with their choice. The investigation and trial established all the details of the crime, and the verdict forever isolated the killer from society. The case remains etched in memory as an example of cruelty and loss.